Hi everyone, welcome to our next installment of our fireside chat. Today we're going to be talking about Microsoft Enterprise Agreements and the importance of an effective renewal. My name's Jason Pepper and I'm lucky enough to work in the version 1 SAM practice. I've been working in software asset management now since about 2006, mainly in the Oracle space, and because we're going to be talking about Microsoft Enterprise Agreements, I'm joined by my Microsoft expert colleague, Carl. So, Carl, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Sure, thanks, Jason. So my name's Carl O'Doherty. I'm the principal consultant for Microsoft licensing here at version 1. I've been working in the area of Microsoft licensing for, I think over 16 years. So very much institutionalized at this stage. I work with our customers to help them understand what their effective Microsoft license position looks like, working with customers to help them to navigate or successfully navigate enterprise agreement renewals, among a variety of other licensing related tasks.
That's great. Thanks, Carl. So let's just jump straight in there. Why is effective enterprise agreement renewal planning so important?
Well, it's a pretty loaded question. I think in a nutshell, I suppose it enables a number of key benefits, I would say. So the first one is that it allows organizations to reduce both the cost of their on-premise software licensing, also on-premise software licenses, as well as cloud-related software licensing expenditure. Essentially, what you're doing is you're identifying, or you're enabling the organization to identify where there may be risk of waste or redundancy within your licensing position, and managing that out accordingly in advance of the enterprise agreement renewal itself. What it also allows you to do is identify what I would call are the hidden risks of license compliance or associated with license compliance. Microsoft licensing is a dark art, right? It's not easy. Some people would say it's getting easier. I think in some respects it has, but one door opens and another door closes, another one opens. So I think effective enterprise agreement planning allows organizations to understand where those risks may reside within their organizations, and that allows them to plan for how best to manage that risk appropriately. Other benefits that effective planning can enable are it helps your organization to understand where there may be a need to seek contractual amendments or clarification amendments from Microsoft that could potentially provide competitive advantage to your organization. And then I think the fourth benefit would be around it allows you to identify where there's an ability to attain how would you say, more competitive pricing structures, or other value-added services that could be included within the deal to help drive adoption of the technology that you're going to invest in over the next 3 years. So, like I always say, Jason, if you fail to plan, you're planning to fail. I see a lot of organizations out there, unfortunately, rolling over and renewing for the sake of it, not having data-driven insights at the heart of their decision-making around the enterprise agreement renewal itself, or indeed true-ups. It's unfortunately a common mistake. So really important that organizations take the time and effectively plan for enterprise renewals for those specific reasons.
Right. Okay. That's quite a lot to think about. And in terms of timing, what's the right time to renew that EA? Does that matter?
Yeah, well, I guess timing is key with these things. So many organizations we see rock on up to the anniversary of their agreement, within 2 months or a month in some cases, and they don't actually have an accurate understanding of what it is they need to include within their renewal or their true up. So I think timing is key, and why is it key is it just allows you to have the right level of runway to understand the art of the possible. So by saying the art of the possible, what I'm referring to here is by allowing your organization to understand where those right sizing opportunities may exist within your organization and having the right level of time to implement that change. It also allows you to understand where there's the potential to implement new licensing metrics. So, Microsoft have a habit of changing their licensing metrics, and that can have an economic and an operational impact on organizations. Sometimes that can be used to your advantage. So by understanding where those opportunities exist and is it possible to implement those those new licensing metrics can enable significant cost reduction in certain cases. Also allows you to understand, what other alternatives are out there outside of the enterprise agreement program. So we see a lot of organizations now looking at this concept of modernizing their Microsoft licensing, particularly as they've moved more and more workloads to the cloud. So we see organizations now looking at CSP as a viable alternative to EA. In some cases that can make sense, but there are risks and benefits, moving between agreements. So it's really good to understand what those risks and benefits are and what's the impact of those on the organization. I think looking at the cloud specifically as well, cloud optimization, cost optimization, right sizing, whatever it is we want to call it, is a moving feast. It's not a one and done type exercise. And I think by having the right level of insights in terms of your cloud consumption in advance of the renewal or the true up cycle is key in order to identify where those cost saving opportunities may reside within the organization.
Right. Okay. So when is the right time to start preparing for your EA renewal?
I would say for small to medium sized enterprise agreements, I would say at a minimum you need to be looking at 6 months out. For large enterprise organizations, I would say leaving it 6 months out is probably leaving it a bit tight. I would be starting, in some cases a year in advance on the renewal or 9 months in advance. So, I think the key thing is to not leave it too late. So 6 months for small to medium, and beyond that for large enterprise, I would say probably a fair assessment of what I see out there with working with other customers.
Yeah, right. Okay, that kind of makes sense. And so 6 to 12 months, but what kind of data, will customers need to collect? What kind of data needs to be considered as part of that process?
Yeah, so I think data takes many forms, and I think when we look at it in the traditional sense, from a software asset management perspective, we always look to get access to, or you should have access to, high quality and accurate software inventory across your client and server estate, and any of the associated underlying license metrics or dependencies that might be out there are key. So that doesn't change. And anybody who goes through some form of an annual baselining of their Microsoft license estate will be familiar with that. But I think the key thing here is that you need to have forensic level information and the right level of coverage within your estate to make sure that what you're putting into your effective license position is accurate, that you're not leaving waste and redundancy on the table, or that you're not leaving the risk of hidden non-compliance out there in your estate. It's also good to have a deep understanding of what's in your Microsoft contract stack. What does that mean to your organization? Depending on the terms of your agreement, as I mentioned earlier on, there can be an opportunity to identify certain amendments or clarifications with Microsoft that could provide for more flexible licensing terms or competitive advantage. So it's really good to get an understanding of what that contract stack looks like early, the current contract stack, as well as what your future contract stack might look like. Another area that I think is really important that's often overlooked is this concept of understanding capacity requirements, particularly within your server estate. So when I look at SQL Server, we see a lot of organizations experiencing SQL Server license creep within their estate. The impact of that can be twofold. It can be a situation arising whereby they're just under licensed based on the number of SQL Server instances or servers that are out there. It can also be a situation where they've added licensing on top of what they perceive to be their capacity requirements, and that in turn is creating significant waste within the organization. So by having a detailed understanding of capacity requirements within the data center is a great way to understand where is there an opportunity to streamline licensing, perhaps remove licensing from certain parts of the business and reuse that elsewhere, or retire some certain license entitlement that might be out there in the estate. So within the on-premise world, there's a variety of activities that can be undertaken in there. We could probably do a whole separate webinar on that topic on its own, or probably a half-day session on it.
Right. Okay. Well, let me add another layer of complexity to that. What about cloud? Does that affect it?
Yeah. So look, I think with cloud, the key thing here is that we look at this concept of going beyond a simple gap analysis in terms of what is my entitlement, what have I what have I got deployed, and what's the delta? Because in the majority of cases, it's going to be either you're in a neutral position or you're going to have a surplus of entitlement. So I think it's really important that organizations look quite deeply at what the actual consumption is for IaaS, PaaS, or SaaS implementations within their organization, so that they can understand not only where there's excess licensing capacity, but where is there an opportunity to right size some of those investments in cloud that might currently be in place. It's also important as well, because I think a lot of organizations have fallen into this mindset that they feel that license compliance is built into all cloud services, which is not necessarily the case. And I think by having again, to use that word, a forensic approach to understanding what you're consuming in the cloud can help identify where some of those hidden risks may reside within your Microsoft estate.
Right. So another level of complexity to think about. So so we've talked about the data, we've talked about the timing, we've talked about potentially about cloud layering on top of that. But obviously for large organizations, there's going to be a lot of people involved in that. So which stakeholders would a customer need to include in their EA renewal team, shall we call them?
So I think the first top tip on that would be to not go it alone. So many organizations fall into that trap of the enterprise agreement is coming up for renewal. You go and look after that, and it's usually somebody in IT is tasked with that activity. So I think it's really important that organizations compile a blend of resources and expertise within the business across finance, legal. IT obviously is an integral part of that, and having some form of executive sponsorship. I think it's really important that by bringing a blend of skills together, it allows you to develop a different perspective in terms of how to approach the renewal. Versus the approach of having a single stakeholder in IT negotiating with Microsoft, battling with finance for budgets and so on. So having a much more holistic approach to the negotiation is key. And in order to do that, you got to involve multiple stakeholders within your business. Yeah. Important that you don't build too big of a team, but it is important that you bring in that cross-function range of skills. I think it's also important to involve the various different entry points within Microsoft that you will work with. You'll have relationships at a commercial level, a technical level, and perhaps at an executive level as well. So it's really important to leverage those relationships, understand what motivates those individuals. That can ultimately lead to a situation where solutions that are agreed upon are mutually beneficial for both organizations. And I think the final point that I would make on it is you will do this exercise once every 3 years. A lot of organizations may have extended terms on their EAs, but once every 3 years, you go and have this complex set of conversations with Microsoft, whereas they're doing this on a monthly basis, their reseller channel are doing it on a monthly basis. So assess where you are. Do you have the skill sets internally to navigate an effective enterprise agreement renewal? If you don't, I would highly recommend leveraging the support of some form of third-party specialist in the area.
Right. Okay. So if the customer kind of wanted to kick off that EA renewal process, how would they engage with Microsoft?
Yeah, so I think first thing is having an effective communication strategy is key. Not having too many voices, streamlining the communications into the negotiation team, having one or two stakeholders effectively communicating with Microsoft so that you're not going off track or giving away your game plan in terms of what your overall negotiation strategy might look like. I think it's also important that you develop what I would call a set of negotiation KPIs that go beyond just discount and understanding what does that mean to the business. That could take the form of value-added services, contractual amendments, but that's a really great anchor point to have as a part of any of your conversations with Microsoft. It allows you to track how successful you're being in the overall negotiation itself at the end, as well as during the negotiation, having those various different KPIs in place. And I think the other thing is important when engaging with Microsoft is to be in control of any license compliance risks that may reside within your organization. It's a common issue within the industry as a part of tier 1, tier 2 software vendor negotiations, organizations coming to the table with significant risks of license non-compliance within their estate. When the negotiation starts to go south, the risk of non-compliance starts to come out as part of the conversation, and then all deals are off the table, and you end up we all know what that ends up looking like, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so be in control of any license compliance risks that might reside out there, I would say.
Right. Okay. Wow. So we've covered quite a spread there. You know, if you were going to wrap those up, you know, the team and the timing and the engagement, stakeholders and so on, how would you wrap that up into a set of top tips?
So first top tip would be start early. I can't emphasize how important that is. Document what success looks like. So what do you want to get out of your enterprise agreement renewal? A lot of organizations, as I said, they just rock on up expecting that they're going to get a 10% discount or a 5% discount or maybe more. So you need to understand what success looks like and look beyond discount. Understand your capabilities. So like, as I said, do you have the capabilities to deliver this internally using resources within your team, or do you need to leverage some form of external resource to help you through the overall process? Another top tip, a bit of a shameless plug, within the version 1 website, we've got quite a lot of blogs and webinars specifically on the topic of enterprise agreement lifecycle management. So there's some really great insights there if you want to go and have a look, see, and get a bit of a deeper understanding in terms of the various different phases associated with enterprise agreement renewal lifecycle management. Well worth having a view.
Brilliant. That's great. Thanks, Carl. Really appreciate your insights there. So if you're watching this and you know some of the things that Carl's discussed have kind of piqued your interest, we version 1 are offering a complimentary license consultation session with Carl and his Microsoft colleagues. If that's something that is interesting to you, just visit this URL that you can see on the screen, and you'll be able to access a 1-hour complimentary consultation session with us. And lastly, just let me say thanks for taking your time to listen to this fireside chat. Thanks to Carl, my colleague, for his insights, and have a great day.